Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look then at what is on the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. First, of course, our top stories. France will reopen the Channel crossing after the UK agreed to provide lateral flow tests for hauliers to show if they have COVID-19. A senior executive of Pfizer has told Sky News that she's confident that their vaccine will work against the new variant. And the President-elect Joe Biden has promised reprisals for a cyber hack on the United States that has been blamed on Russia.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour or so, we'll see what's making the headlines. Tonight, with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, and the writer, Benedict Spence. Lovely to see you both. Hello to you. Firstly, let's check out the front pages, shall we? The Financial Times reporting that France will open its border with the UK again, but will only allow lorry drivers to pass through if they've tested negative for COVID-19. The Metro carries a striking image of hundreds of lorries parked on the runway of an RAF base in Kent, using it as a place to stop and rest. The Eye hears that 3,000 people may be stranded in Kent. With Christmas mere days away, The Sun describes the situation as a kick in the baubles, also reporting that more Britons will be put into Tier 4 from Boxing Day. While The Express accuses the French president of being no friend of Britain. Daily Mail says more parts of the country could be put into Tier 4 on Boxing Day as the new strain of the virus spreads. And The Guardian reports that GPs have expressed concerns over the availability of the COVID vaccine, with many saying they have yet to receive supplies. Well, Sonia Sodha, Benedict Spence are here. It's felt like a perfect storm type week, hasn't it, this week? Possibly some movement at last on the border, but in fairly controlled fashion, Sonia.
That's right. So we're getting news tonight, which a lot of the newspapers are reporting and makes the front pages, that France is set to reopen its borders. But the thing is that it will be asking for a negative COVID test from French nationals, from hauliers, from people who are resident in France, people who've got a home there. So that's going to be pretty challenging. The good news is that at first, it sounds like French officials were veering towards insisting on negative PCR tests, which are the tests that can sort of take around 48 hours to return a result. That's obviously not going to help the 4,000 or so lorries that are stacked up in Kent. We've got some really dramatic photos of those on the front pages today. Lots of lorries in a sort of army airfield in Kent too. But now it sounds like France will accept the much quicker turnaround lateral flow tests, and they only take an hour. So that is going to be less of a challenge to roll out, but still a really big challenge, given that we now do have thousands of lorries backed up in Kent and on the runway at sort of Marston Airport. So it really is going to be a challenge to get things moving again. But you can understand, I think what happened was that Boris Johnson gave his press conference on Saturday, and news of this new variant really spooked the continent. And that is why we've seen several European countries take really tough measures to try and prevent that strain from getting across their borders. Although it has to be said, scientists think that in some countries it probably is already there.
Yes, and I suppose Matt Hancock appearing on the airwaves on Sunday morning saying the new variant was out of control just compounded the fears of the French, don't you think? But we saw the Metro there, no room at the inn. Road haulage experts talked about if there is a 1, 2, 3 minute delay, for example, on checks as lorries go through this border, it causes untold problems. Even if this lateral flow test is quick, this is still going to be a permanent issue, isn't it, Benedict?
It is, but I suppose really that's, without meaning to sound so sort of blasé about it, that's the price you pay if your response to a pandemic is to sort of impose these sort of, and for a start to impose lockdowns, but also to impose very stringent border measures, which I don't think actually anybody denies are justified. I think, a lot of people are looking at what the continent is doing to us now and going, oh, well, they aren't very friendly. But at the same time, I think actually the sensible thing, and a lot of people said this at the time, was that really Western Europe the United States should have been closing its borders to countries at the start of the year when it was clear that there was a pandemic and it was out of control. And I think that sort of key terminology there, saying that it's out of control, I understand, you're wanting to get the message across to members of the public that they need to take this seriously. But you can never have that much confidence in a government that says that it is dealing with something that it is unable to sort of get a hold of. I do think on the subject of haulage specifically, it makes for sort of very dramatic pictures. It's very startling, I think, to see this sort of worst case scenario come to pass. But I think in the interests of sort of giving a balanced account of things, we do have to maintain the vast majority, at least 80% of all haulage between the continent and the UK doesn't come via the tunnel. It doesn't come via lorries. It comes via an awful lot of it comes via Holland, via Belgium. We need to sort of take that into account. And so if you're sort of looking at these figures and saying, oh, well, there's going to be sort of dreadful shortages, that's not necessarily the case just yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's prompted all sorts of interviews on what sort of great produce we grow here. We'll come on to that in a minute, but let's just go to the Sun's front page. You could debate the language use here. Mutant bug on the rampage is their top banner on the on their headline. I mean, a lot of people are really genuinely scared. I suppose newspapers have to have some responsibility, I guess, in the use of language. But the two stories there, kicking the baubles, Macron forced to let stuck truckers through, and also they're reporting, as is the Daily Mail, that more Brits will be in Tier 4 from Boxing Day. Now, we know the next review day was supposed to be December the 30th, but with the action of countries like Scotland, for example, was it always inevitable, Sonia, that that date or some action might be brought forward?
Well, I think the clues were in the press conference that the government gave on Saturday, really revealing very worrying data about how quickly the infection is now spreading in London and parts of the southeast. And scientists sound increasingly sure, I mean, you never know 100%, but they sound increasingly sure that it is associated with this new variant being more infectious. And worryingly, that variant has been found in other parts of the country now, some of the papers are reporting. So in Devon, for example, and Cumbria. So I do think it's inevitable. It's quite scary, actually. I've been keeping an eye on infection rates in London, where I live, where my parents live, in such a south of London as well. And, literally every day you go and check the data, and it's really, really ticked up in a way that it just wasn't about 4 weeks ago. So it is worrying, I think. I think people are right to feel worried. I think the message that was given by Boris Johnson on Saturday was incredibly serious. And it really wouldn't surprise me. I think we started to see this messaging from scientists in the last few days, sort of really questioning whether Tier 3 goes far enough when you've got this new strain of the infection, whether the restrictions go far enough and do enough to stop that spread. So I definitely think, it's not a surprise to me to see these papers reporting that the government is thinking about putting more areas where the infection rates are really ticking up from Tier 3 into Tier 4. And I think it would be a real mistake to wait till December the 30th to do that, just because that's the next review date. Things seem to be moving very quickly with this new strain. We're learning more about it. And I think it's right that the government takes prompt action to get it under control. So it's not a surprise to me at all.
Yes, it's our understanding that the areas that are ticking up the fastest are those that border the current Tier 4, some areas of which are still in Tier 2, in fact. So 6 people can still mingle in a garden, for example, presumably under some sort of shelter, like a gazebo or something, because it's pretty chilly out there. But nonetheless, there's not much control in the sense of the lockdown sense that you get from Tier 4. Benedict, what do you think? Do you think that is inevitable? Do you think the government needs to be seen to be getting ahead of this new variant as it spreads?
Absolutely. I do think it's inevitable. I think it makes a lot more sense that it's going to be the places that border the current Tier 4. If this new strain of the virus is as contagious as is being said, it makes absolute sense that it would spread very quickly and that suddenly you could see places jumping from Tier 2 to Tier 4 almost without any sort of warning. But again, it is very worrying to see the numbers sort of spiraling as they are. But again, the way that it's sort of phrased, this mutant virus, I think that gives the impression, everybody gets the impression that necessarily, like the Hulk, it sort of makes it stronger somehow. The reality is the average virus, when it does mutate, it does so in order to make it easier for it to replicate itself, to pass itself from host to host. And, ultimately, it's not in the interest from an evolutionary perspective, especially from something that's just, sort of emerged on the scene. It's not really in the interests of a virus to end up killing off all of its hosts. So as much as we can say it certainly appears to have a much bigger uptake in terms of transmission, we've yet to see figures that suggest that the mortality rate is any higher. So I do think some proportion is needed when we take that into account.
Let's go on to The Guardian and the vaccine. First of all, reassuringly, we spoke to the group president of Pfizer today, who was confident that their vaccine would still tackle this variant. We also heard the scientist, didn't we, behind BioNTech, who suggested that should it be needed, they could turn around a new vaccine in about 6 weeks, which is incredible, really, to tackle, a big variation in the strain. But The Guardian is raising questions about the speed of the delivery of the vaccine, with already America, the US overtaking the numbers of people that have had it here in the UK.
That's right. So I think we've done apparently we've got 500,000 doses of the vaccine out already. But obviously, this is something which health professionals are absolutely desperate to get out to as many people as possible, particularly with this new sort of infectious strain. I think it's really positive news that scientists seem pretty confident that the mutations that we've seen in the virus doesn't mean that the vaccine's not going to work on it. That's really good news. But this story is really about there's still a good number of hospital trusts, of GP surgeries that are still waiting for their vaccine doses. Now, you might say, well, that's just inevitable. We've got numbers coming in, we've got doses of the vaccine coming in, but it's inevitable that not every single GP surgery in the country is going to have it, or not every single hospital trust. But I think what you're seeing here is the frustration you must feel if you're running a GP surgery, or if you're in a hospital trust and you're watching other people getting vaccinated in other parts of the country, people who are very, very clinically vulnerable to this virus, who are over 85, and you're not able to vaccinate the vulnerable people in your local area, and people, if you're a GP, patients that you've been seeing and have known for years and years and years, and you're not able to get the vaccine out to them yet, I think there must be a bit of frustration there and a bit of worry there. And I think that's what we're seeing reflected in this story.
And indeed, the difficulties remain. The at-risk group have to not go to their GPs, often to a central hub, which is several miles away. They're concerned about getting into vehicles with people. We've always known that the Pfizer-BioNTech jab, Benedict, was a complicated one to roll out, given the temperature issues.
Oh, absolutely. But I think it also sort of speaks to the I remember at the time when the British government was bringing in all of its new regulations and everything, it appeared from the outset that discovering or getting a hold of a vaccine was sort of the Hail Mary solution to the coronavirus in this country. Because the government botched so many things at the start, it sort of set its eyes on, well, actually, what we need to do is be one of the first, if not the first, to get a hold of this thing and roll it out. Now, they got this fantastic PR win by saying, well, we're the first one that have approved it, and we're going to start administering it to people. But of course, as everybody knows, getting a hold of the thing and administering it are two very different things. And I suppose if you were to look at the UK's reputation over the course of the last 9 months or so at actually rolling out mass programs, mass testing, it isn't a particularly good one. So I don't know why we'd be particularly surprised. One thing that I did see, though, was that somebody crunched the numbers and worked out that if we were able to end up vaccinating people at the same speed as which we currently are testing them for the coronavirus, by March, we'd have everybody who fell into the sort of, the categories of most vulnerable people, everybody would be vaccinated. And I do think that really the UK government, of course, it's got a lot of other things on its plate, but really you've got this solution to the problem right here. All that matters is how fast you can roll it out. And that ought to be the thing, really, that they prioritise above almost everything else, is actually the speed at which they get it to GP surgeries and those that need it.
That and getting a lateral flow test to hauliers as well. There's plenty on the government's agenda, as you can see. But the good news is that as well as Pfizer, Moderna and tonight AstraZeneca as well, suggesting that they think their vaccine would work with the new variant. So that is, positive news at least. Well, coming up, lording it over everyone, we will discuss the latest row over peerages when we come back. That and more. Just a bit of confirmation of what had been expected, and it's been confirmed that Israel will hold a snap election in March. after its parliament failed to meet a deadline to pass a budget. That will be the fourth election there in 2 years. Clearly the latest coalition not working. So another election then for Israel to be held in March. Well, you're watching the press preview then with me tonight, Sonia Sodha and Benedict Spence. Welcome back to both of you. Brexit. Yes, Benedict, you start.
Where do you want me to start? I mean, I think this is the metro that we're talking about, and that's the idea that Brexit trade talks are set to continue. Ever thus was it. You know, I don't think anybody was sort of surprised by the idea that possibly these rock solid deadlines that we keep on telling are approaching might be a little bit more flexible than we initially thought. But obviously, the intent is to still get some sort of agreement before the end of the year. But supposedly, Michel Barnier has said today that, you know, that he called the UK's offer on fishing today unacceptable. I think it's a difference of 10% in terms of who gets what at this moment in time. But you can see clearly, you know, that they're edging towards some sort of agreement on fish. It's just not currently where it needs to be. Now, it has to be said, things like state aid and level playing field, I for a very long time thought that this would take a lot more hashing out than was perhaps within their remit to do with Mr. Barnier and Mr. Frost. Supposedly, Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen have gone over the heads of the EU negotiators and Brexit negotiators today to try and hammer this out. But nothing has changed, I think, as somebody once famously said. We're ever so slightly closer, but we're not there yet. OK, and
it will be very interesting to see if the queues at the border either make the UK government go, oh, it's happening anyway, or, oh, my goodness, look, it's happening. So we will see, as you say, and certainly some of the compromises reported on fishing may not be acceptable to those in the UK fishing fleet. But we have to move on because we've only got 30 seconds left to talk about peerages. Interesting story, which makes the front page of the Telegraph. Sonia.
That's right. So in the New Year's list, it turns out that Boris Johnson has created a new Tory peer from a donor who gave the Conservative Party £3 million. But also, very significantly, the House of Lords Appointment Commission advised against appointing him to the House of Lords. And for the first time ever, a Prime Minister has gone against their recommendation and advice and appointed him anyway. So I think this just looks terrible. It's terrible for the Prime Minister to go. It's a terrible look for the Prime Minister to go against the advice of the official independent commission. It's a terrible look to put someone in the House of Lords who's given millions to a political party anyway. That's not what the House of Lords should be for. And we've now got, you know, more than 160 more Lords than we do democratically elected MPs. So it just reinforces this idea that the House of Lords is a really bloated House of Parliament with lots of donors of political parties
Sonia?
who really shouldn't be there making laws.
There's so much news around. We need a double-length programme, but we will see you at 11:30 for another bite of that. Thank you very much indeed, Benedict and Sonia. To the weather now.